Hello pre-calculus students, and welcome to a video on function operations. Okay, so in your textbook, this can be found in section 2.1, excuse the motorcycle. In our lessons, this is lesson 2, 3b, so this is week 2, day 3, so that's going to be Thursday and Friday, and this is your B lesson, which means it's the one that you do after class. Okay, so this won't be presented in class. Okay. So first, the four operations, the basic operations, add, subtract, multiply, and divide. Just a little notation here. F plus g of x means the same thing as f of x plus g of x. F minus g of x is f of x minus g of x. F times g of x is f of x times g of x. And the one you have to be careful of because of the denominator, f over g of x, is f of x over g of x. Okay, so let's look at an example of two functions, f of x and g of x, and we'll just look at the four operations with variables and with numbers too. Okay, so let's start out with f plus g of x. All right, so this is the same thing as f of x plus g of x. Notice the inputs are x, so we're not going to evaluate, we're just going to put these expressions together and add them up, and that's it. That's all we're doing here. So this would just be 2x squared, that's f of x, plus 3x plus 2, that's g of x, and that is it. And since that doesn't have any radicals and it doesn't have any fractions, the domain is all real numbers. Okay? F of g of 1. There's a couple ways you can do this, but I'm just going to do f of 1 minus g of 1. F of 1 minus g of 1. Okay, well f of 1 is going to be 2 times 1 squared. That's just plugging 1 into that. G of 1, we're subtracting that. That's going to be 3 times 1 plus 2. Okay, just be careful about the subtraction because you are subtracting the entire g function, not just a part of it, so I'll put it in parentheses. So this is 2 minus 3 plus 2 is 5, and that is just negative 3. Okay, now let's look at some division. So the domain here might be a little bit tricky because we're going to get a denominator that has a variable in it, so there will be some kind of an exclusion. By the way, for B, there's no domain question, it's just a number. Okay, so we have f divided by g of x, which is f of x over g of x. That's 2x squared, there's your f of x in the numerator. 3x plus 2, there's your g of x in the denominator. And now we're looking at f over g of x. Okay, we do have a domain restriction on this because we know that 3x plus 2 can't be 0, so that must be excluded from the domain. So 3x can't be negative 2, or x can't be negative 2/3. So there's our domain restriction, and we can write this as the domain goes from negative infinity to negative 2/3 unioned with negative 2/3 to positive infinity. And that's the interval notation way of writing that. And sorry about kind of going a little crooked there, but there you have it. Okay, f times g of 1. I'm going to pause the video, have you try it, and we'll see how you do. Okay, hopefully you got 10. If not, you might want to pause it again and just see if you can figure out what you did wrong. Okay, let's look at another set of functions here. So these are more interesting functions, square roots and absolute values. So now we're going to do f plus g of x and find the domain of this one. So we still just add these functions. The input is still just x. So we're going to have a variable expression as our answer. And it's just going to be f of x plus g of x, which is just the square root of 2 minus x, plus g of x, which is the absolute value of x. there's the function. And as far as the domain of the function, let's just make sure that we consider that radical. So we know that 2 minus x must be greater than or equal to 0. Add x to both sides, and we get 2 is greater than or equal to x. In other words, x is less than or equal to 2, just to write that the other way. So the domain of this would be negative infinity up to 2, including 2. There's the function and its domain. Okay, now let's just look at another way of thinking about this. Let's find f plus g in two different ways. Okay, so let's look at method 1 first. And method 1 will be to do what we did the last time. So it's just to take f of 1 plus g of 1. F of 1 being the square root of 2 minus 1. G of 1 being the absolute value of 1. Giving us the square root of 1, which is 1, plus the absolute value of 1, which is 1, giving us 2. Okay, straightforward. Okay, now let's look at method 2. Now most of you will prefer to do method 1. I showed you that one first, but I just want you to see that you can do this another way. So you can first define the function f plus g of x. So f plus g of x, we know, is the square root of 2 minus x plus the absolute value of x. So now that we have defined a function, we can write f plus g, that's the name of the function now, f plus g, of 1, which means we replace all of the x's in our function with 1. So we get 2 minus 1 plus the absolute value of 1, which is exactly what we did before. It's still 2. It's just looking at it from the perspective of understanding that you're actually finding a function. This is a function, and while most functions have names like f of x, g of x, h of x, this particular function has the name f plus g. Okay, let's look at one last example here. Let's just take f of x and g of x and look at their quotient. So, and the domain. So f of x over g of x would be, what do we have? The square root of 2 minus x. Square root of 2 minus x over the absolute value of x. And just a good exercise to practice with your domain. There's the function. As far as the domain, you have to consider the radical in the numerator. So we know that 2 minus x must be greater than or equal to 0. In other words, 2 is greater than or equal to x, and in other words, x is less than or equal to 2. And we also have to consider the fact that the absolute value of x cannot be 0. Well, the only way for the absolute value of x to be 0 is if x were 0. So x cannot be 0. 0 in the denominator would make this undefined. So we have these two restrictions, and let's just remember how to do that. We're going to make a number line. Put the two first put the exclusion. I'll put both on here, so 0 and 2. Let's put our exclusion down. Remember, once we put the exclusion down, we can't undo it, so we never can cover that up. And then we're going to put x is less than or equal to 2. So we put from here, it goes this way, it continues on forever, and you've got two intervals there. So when you state your domain, state both intervals. So the domain is from negative infinity up to 0, not including 0, unioned with 0 to 2, including 2. And there's your function, there's your domain. Okay, I hope you found this video helpful.